The point which has to be considered is the origin of this corruption in nature. Everyone will admit that the philosopher in our description of him is a rare being, but what numberless causes tend to destroy these rare beings? There is no good thing which may not be a cause of evil health, wealth, strength, rank, and the virtues themselves when placed under unfavorable circumstances. For as in the animal or vegetable what the strongest seeds most need, or the accompaniment of good air and soil, so the best of human characters turn out the worst where they fall upon a seed unsuitable soil, whereas weak natures hardly do ever do any considerable good or harm. They are not the stuff out of which either great criminals or great heroes are made. The philosopher follows as the same analogy. He is either the best or the worst of all men. Some persons say that the sophists are the corrupters of youth, but is not public opinion the real sophist, who is everywhere present in those very persons, in the assembly, in the courts, in the camp, in the applauses and hisses of the theatre echoed by the surrounding hills. Will not a young man's heart leap amid these discordant sounds, and will any education save him from being carried away by the torrent? Nor is this all, for if he will not yield to opinion, this follows the gentle compulsion of exile or death. What principle of rival sophists of any or anybody else can overcome in such an equal contest? Characters there may be more than human, who exceptions God may save a man, but not his own strength. For there I would have you consider that the hireling sophist only gives back to the world their own opinions. He is the keeper of the monster who knows who who knows how to flatter or anger him and observes the meaning of his inaccurate grounds. Good is what pleases him, evil what he dislikes. Truth and duty are determined only by the test of the brute. Such is the sophist wisdom, and such is the condition of those who make public opinion the test of truth, whether in art or in morals. The curse is laid upon them of being and doing what it approves, and when they attempt first principles, the failure is ludicrous. Think of all this and ask yourself whether the world is more likely to be a believer in the unity of the idea or in the multiplicity of phenomena. And the world, if not a believer in the idea, cannot be a philosopher, but must therefore be a persecutor of philosophers. There is another evil. The world does not like to lose the gifted nature, and so they flattered the young Alcibiades into a magnificent opinion of his own capacity. The tall, proper youth begins to expand and is dreaming of kingdoms and empires. If at this instant, friend, if at this instant a friend whispers to him, now the gods lighten thee. Thou art a great fool and must be educated. Do you think that he will listen, or suppose a better sort of man who is attracted towards philosophy? Will they not make Herculean efforts to spoil and corrupt him? Are we not right in the, in saying that class the love of knowledge no less than riches may devour him? Men of this class, critias, often become politicians. They are the authors of great mischief in states, and sometimes also of great good. And thus philosophy is deserted by her natural protectors, and others enter in and dishonor her. vulgar little minds see the land open and rush from the prisons of the arts into her temple. A clever mechanic, having a soul course as his body, thinks that he will again chase by becoming her sitter. For philosophy, even in her fallen estate, has a dignity of her own, and he, like bald little blacksmiths, a pretence as he is, having made some money and got out of durance, verses and dresses himself as a bridegroom and marries his master's daughter. What will be the issue of such marriages? Will they not be vile and bastard, devoid of truth and nature? They will. Small then is the remnant of genuine philosophers. There may be a few who are citizens of small states in which politics are not worth thinking of, or who have been detained by Tiage's bridle of ill health. For my own case of the oracular sign is almost unique and too rare to be worth mentioning, and when they have tasted the pleasures of philosophy and have taken a look at that, then at the den of thieves and place of wild beasts, which is human life, will stand aside from the storm under the shelter of a wall and try to preserve their own innocence and to depart in peace. A great work too will have been accomplished by them. Great, yes, but not the greatest, for man is a social being and can only attain his highest development in the society which is best suited to him. Enough, then, of the causes why philosophy has such an evil name. Another question is, which of existing states is suited to her? Not one of them. At present, she is like some exotic seed which degenerates in strange soil. Only in her proper state which will she be shown to be of heavenly growth, and is her proper state ours of some other ours in all points but one, which was left undetermined. You will remember our saying that some living mind or witness of the legislator was needed in states, but we were afraid to enter upon the subject of such difficulty, and now the question recurs and has not ground as here. How may how may philosophy be safely studied? Let us bring her into the light of day and make an end of the inquiry. In the first place, I say boldly that nothing can be worse than the present mode of study. Persons usually pick up a little philosophy in early youth and in the intervals of business, but they never master the real difficulty, which is dialectic. Later, perhaps, they occasionally go to a lecture on philosophy, year advanced, and the sound of philosophy, unlike that of Heraclitus, sets never to rise again. This order of education should be reversed. It should begin with gymnastics in youth, and as the man strengthens, he should increase the gymnastics of his soul. Then, when active life is over, let him finally return to philosophy. You are in earnest, Socrates, but the world will be equally earnest in withstanding you no more than Thrasymachus. Do not make a quarrel between Thrasymachus and me, who were never enemies and are now friends enough, and I shall do my best to convince him and all mankind of the truth of my words, or at any rate to prepare for the future when, in other life, we may again take part in similar discussions. That will be a long time hence, not long in comparison with eternity. The many will probably remain incredulous, for they have never seen the natural unity of ideas, but only artificial juxtapositions, not free and generous thoughts, but tricks of controversy or quips of law, a perfect man ruling in a perfect state. even a single one they have not known. And we foresaw that there was no chance and perfection either in states or individuals, until necessity was laid upon philosophers on the roads, but those whom we call the useless cars of holding office, or until the sons of kings were inspired a true flow of philosophy, whether in the infinity of past time there has been or is in some distant land, or ever will or ever will be hereafter, an ideal such as we have described, Aristotle maintained that there has been, is, and will be such as that whenever the muse of philosophy rules. Will you say that the world is of another mind? Oh, my friend, do not revile the world. They will soon change their opinion if they are gently entreated and are taught the true nature of the philosopher. Who can hate a man who loves him, or be jealous of one who has no jealousy? Consider again that the many hate not the true but the false philosophers, the pretenders who force their way in without invitation, and are always speaking of persons and not of principles, which, unlike the spirit of philosophy, for the untrue philosopher despises earthly strife. His eye is fixed on the eternal order in accordance with which he molds himself into the divine image, and not himself only, but other men, and is the creator of features, private as well as public. When mankind see that happiness of states is only to be found in the image, will they be will they be angry with us for attempting to delineate it? Certainly not. But what will be the process of delineation? That is, will do nothing until he had made he has made a tabula rasa. On this he will inscribe the constitution of a state, glancing often at the divine truth of nature, and from that deriving the godlike among men, mingling the two elements, rubbing out and painting in, until there is a perfect harmony or fusion of the divine and human. But perhaps the world will doubt the existence of such an artist. What will they doubt? That the philosopher is a lover of truth, having a nature akin to the best. And if they admit this, and if they admit this, will they still quarrel with us for making philosophers our kings? They will be less disposed and quarrel. Let us assume that. Let us assume then that they are pacified. Still, a person may hesitate about the probability of the son of a king being a philosopher, and we do not deny that they are very liable to be corrupted. But yet, surely, in the course of ages, there might be one exception, and one is enough. If one if one son of a king were a philosopher and had obedient citizens, he might bring the ideal polity into being. Hence, we conclude that our laws are not only the best, but that they are also possible, though not free from difficulty. I gain nothing by evading the troublesome questions which arise concerning women and children. I will be wiser now and acknowledge that we must go to the bottom of another question: what is to be the education of our guardians? It was agreed that they were to be lovers of the country and were to be tested in the refiner's fire of pleasures and pains, and those who came forth pure and remained fixed in their principles were to have honors and rewards in life and after death. But at this point, the argument put on her veil and turned into another path. I hesitated to make the assertion, which I now hazard, that our guardians must be philosophers. You remember all the contradictory elements which element in the philosopher, how difficult to find them all in a single person. Intelligence and spirit are often combined with steadiness. The stolid, fearless, neither is averse to intellectual toil, and yet and yet these opposite elements are all necessary, and therefore, as we were saying before, the aspirant must be tested in pleasures and dangers, and also we must know further it in the highest branches of knowledge. You will remember that when we spoke of the fictitious mention was made of a longer road which you were satisfied to leave unexplored. Enough seemed to have been said. Enough, my friend. But what is enough while anything remains wanting? Of all men, the guardian must not faint in the search after truth. He must be prepared to take the longer road, or he will never reach that higher region, which is above all, which is above the four virtues, and of the virtues of the features too. He must not only get an outline but a clear and distinct vision. Strange that we should be so precise about trifles, so careless about the highest thoughts. And what are the highest? You to pretend unconsciousness, when you have so often heard me speak of the idea of good, about which we know so little, and without which, though a man gain the world, he has no profit of it. So some people imagine that the good is wisdom, but involves a cycle. The good they say is wisdom. Wisdom has to do with the good, according to the orders of the good if is preserved. But then comes the absurdity that good is bad, for there are bad precepts as well as good. Again, the good must have reality, and a man may desire the appearance of virtue, but he will not desire the appearance of good. Our guardians then to be ignorant of the supreme principle of which every man has a presentiment, and without which no man has any real knowledge of anything but Socrates. What is supreme principle? Knowledge of yourself or what? You may think we you may think me troublesome, but I say that you have no business to be always repeating the doctrines of others instead of giving us your own. Can I say what I do not know? You may offer an opinion, and will the blindness and goodness of opinion content you when you might have the light and certain of sense? I will only ask you to give such an explanation of the good as you have given already of temperance and justice. I wish that I could, but in my present mood I cannot reach to the height of the knowledge of the good. To the parent or principal I cannot introduce you, but the child begotten in his image, which I may compare with the interest of the principal, I will hold the count, and do not let me give you a false statement of the depth. Do you remember our all distinction of the main of the many beautiful and the one beautiful, the particular and the universal, the objects of sight and the problem and the objects of thought? Did you ever consider that the objects of sight imply a faculty of sight which the most complex and costly of our senses require not only objects of sense but also a medium which is light, without which the sight will not distinguish between colors and all will be a blank. For light is not noble but between the perceiving faculty and the thing perceived, and the good who gives us light is the sun, who is the eye of the day, but is not to be confounded with the eye of man. This eye of the day or sun is what I call the child of good, the child of the good, standing in the same relation to the visible world as the good to the intellectual. When the sun shines, the eye sees, and in the intellectual world where truth is, there is sight and light. Now, now that which is the sort of intelligent natures, is the idea of good, the cause of knowledge and truth, yet other and fairer than there are, and standing in the same relation to them, in which the sun stands to light, or inconceivable height of beauty. which is above knowledge and above truth. You cannot surely be pleased, sir, he said. Peace, I replied. And this idea of good, like the sun, is also the cause of good, and the author not of knowledge only, but of being yet greater far than either in dignity and power. That is a reach of thought more than human. But I pray go on with the image, for I suspect that there is no more behind. There is, I said, and bear in mind our two sons of principles. Imagine further the corresponding worlds, one of the visible, the other of intelligible. You may assist your fancy by figuring the distinction under the image of a line divided into two equal parts, and may again subdivide each part into two lesser segments representative of the stages of knowledge in either sphere. The lower portion of the lower or visible sphere will consist of shadows and reflections, and its upper and smaller portion will contain real objects in the world and of nature or of art. The sphere of the intelligible you also have two distinctions, one of mathematics in which there is no assent but all is descent, no inquiry into premises, but only drawing of inferences. In this division, the mind works of figures with figures and numbers, the images of which are taken not from the shadows, but from the objects, although the truth of them is seen only with the mind's eye, and they are used as hypotheses without being analyzed. Whereas in other division, reason used the hypotheses as stages or steps in the ascent of the ideas of the idea to the idea of good, to which she first turns them, and then against the sense, working from in the region of ideas, and of ideas only in her ascent as well as descent, and finally resting in them. I partly understand. He replied, you mean that the ideas of science are superior to the hypothetical, metaphorical conceptions of geometry and the other aspects of sciences, whichever is to be the name of them, and the later conceptions you refuse to make subjects of pure intellect, because they have no first principle, although when resting on a first principle, they pass into higher sphere. You understand me very well, I said, and now to those four divisions of knowledge, you may assign for corresponding faculties pure intelligence to the higher sphere, active intelligence to the second, to the third, faith to the fourth, the perception of shadows and the clearness of the several faculties will be in the same ratio as the truth of the objects to which they are related. Like Socrates, we may recapitulate the virtues of the philosopher in language which seems to reach beyond the horizon of the age and country. He is described as the spectator of all time and all existence. He has the noble gift. He has the noble gifts of nature and makes the highest use of them. All his desires are absorbed in the love of wisdom, which is the love of truth. None of the graces of a beautiful soul are wanting in him, neither can he fear death or think much of human life. The idea of modern times hardly retains the simplicity of the antique. There, there is there is not the same originality either in truth or error which characterized the Greeks. The philosopher is no longer living in the unseen, nor is he sent by an oracle to convince mankind of ignorance, nor does he regard knowledge as a system of ideas leading upwards by regular stages to the idea of good. The eagerness of the pursuit has abated. There is more division. There is more division of labor and less of comprehensive reflection upon nature and human life as a whole, more of exact observation and less of anticipation and inspiration. Still, in the altered conditions of knowledge, the parallel is not wholly lost. There may be use in translating the conception of Plato into the language of our of our age, of our own age. The philosopher in modern times is one who fixes his mind on the laws of nature in their sequence and connection, not on fragments and pictures of nature, on history, not on controversy, on the truths which are acknowledged by the law, by the few, not on opinions of the many. He is aware of the importance of classifying according to nature, and will try to separate the limbs of science without breaking them further. There is no part of truth, whether great or small, which he will dishonor, and in the least things he will discern the greatest part men. Like the ancient philosopher, he sees the whole pervaded by analogies, but he can also tell what in some cases it, while in some cases a single instance is sufficient for an induction, Mill's logic, while in other cases a thousand examples will prove nothing. He inquires into a portion of knowledge only because the whole has grown too vast to be embraced by a single mind or life. He has a clearness. He, he has he has a clearer conception of the divisions of science of their relation to the mind of man than was possible to the ancients. Like Plato, he has a vision of the unity of knowledge not as the beginning of philosophy to be attained by a study of elementary mathematics, but as the far-off result of the working of many minds in many ages. He is aware that mathematical studies are preliminary to almost every other. At the same time, he will not reduce all varieties of knowledge to the type of mathematics. He, too, must have a nobility of character, without which genius loses the better half of greatness. Regarding the world as a point in immensity, and each individual as a link in never-ending chain of existence, he will not think much of his own life or be greatly afraid of death. Adamant objects first of all to the form of the Socratic reasoning, thus showing that Plato is aware of the imperfection of his own method. He brings the accusation against himself which might be brought against him by a modern logician, that he extracts the answer because he knows how to put the question. In a long argument, words are apt to change their meaning slightly, or premises may be assumed or conclusions inferred with rather too much certainty or universality. The variation of at each step may be unobserved, and yet at last the divergence becomes considerable. Hence, the failure of attempts to apply arithmetical or algebraic formulae to logic. The imperfection, or rather the higher and more elastic nature of language, does not allow words to have the precision of numbers or of symbols, and this quality in language impairs the force of an argument which has many steps. The objection, though fairly met by Socrates in this particular instance, may be regarded as implying a reflection upon the Socratic mode of reasoning. In here as well as elsewhere, Plato seems to intimate that the time has come when the negative and interrogative method of Socrates must be superseded by a positive and constructive one, of which examples are given in some of the later dialogues. Adeimantus further argues that the ideal is wholly at variance with facts, for experience proves philosophers to be either useless or lost. contrary to all expectations. Contrary to all expectation, Socrates has no hesitation in admitting the truth of this and expressed the anomaly in allegory, first characteristically depreciating his own inventive powers. In this allegory, the people are distinguished from the professional politicians, and as well are spoken of in tone of pity rather than of censure under the image of noble captain who is not very quick in his perceptions. The uselessness of philosophers is explained by the circumstance that mankind will not use them. The world in all ages has been divided between contempt and fear of those who employ the power of ideas and know no other weapons. Concerning this, the first philosopher, Socrates, argues that the best is most liable to corruption, and that the finer the truth is more likely to suffer from alien conditions. We observe that there are more some kindness of excellence which spring from a peculiar delicacy of constitution, as is evidently true of the poetical and imaginative temperament, which often seems to depend on impatience and hence can only breathe of life in a certain atmosphere. The man of genius has greater pains and greater pleasures, greater powers and greater weaknesses, and often a greater play of character than is to be found in ordinary men. He can assume the disguise of virtue or disinterestedness without having them or prefer personal enmity. In the language of patriotism and philosophy, he can say that he can see the word which all men are thinking, hears an insight which is terrible into the follies and weaknesses of his fellow men. And Alcibiades, a Mirabeau, or, or a Napoleon I are born either to be the authors of great efforts and states or of great good when they are drawn in that direction. Yet the thesis corruptio optimi pessima cannot be maintained generally or without regard to the kind of excellence which is corrupted. The alien conditions which are corrupting to one nature may be the elements of culture to another. In general, a man can only receive his highest development in a, in a congenial state of family, among friends or fellow workers, but also he may sometimes be stirred by adverse circumstances to such a degree that he rises up against them and reform them. And while weaker or coarser characters will extract good out of evil, say in a corrupt state of the church of society and life, and live on happily, allowing the evil to remain. The finer or stronger natures may be crushed or spoiled by surrounding influences, may become misanthrope in philanthrope by turns, or in a few instances, like the founders of monastic orders or the reformers, owing to some peculiarity in themselves or in their age, may break away entirely from the word and from the church, sometimes into great good, sometimes into great evil, sometimes into both. And the same holds in the lesser sphere for convent, school, and family. Plato would have us consider how easily the best natures are overpowered by public opinion and what efforts the rest of mankind will make to get possession of them. The world, the church, their own position, their own profession, any political or party organization are always carrying them off their legs and teaching them or apply high and holy names to their own prejudices and interests. The monster corporation to which they belong judges right and to be the pleaser of the community. The individual becomes one of his order. If he resists, the world, the world is too much for him. and will sooner or later be reference of him. This is perhaps a one-sided but not wholly untrue picture of the maxims and practice of mankind when they sit down together at an assembly, either in ancient or modern times. When the higher natures are corrupted by politics, the lower take possession of the vacant place of philosophy. This is described in one of those continuous images in which the argument, to use a Platon expression, fails herself, and which is dropped and reappears at intervals. The question is asked, why are the citizens of states so hostile to philosophy? The answer is that they do not know her, and yet there is also a better mind of the many they would believe if they were taught. But hitherto they have only known a conventional imitation of philosophy, words, method, systems which have no life in them, a divine person uttering the words of beauty and freedom, the friend of man holding communion with the eternal, and seeking to frame the state in that image they have never known. The some double feeling respecting the mass of mankind has always existed among men. The first thought is that the people are the enemies of truth and life. The second, that this only arises out of an accidental error and confusion, and that they do not really hate those who love them if they could be educated to know them. In later in the later part of the sixth book, three questions have to be considered. First, the nature of the longer and more circuitous way, which is contrasted with the shorter and more imperfect method of Book 4. Second, the heavenly pattern of or idea of the state. Third, the relation of divisions of knowledge to one another and to corresponding faculties of the soul. 1. Of the higher method of knowledge in Plato, we have only a glimpse. Neither here nor in the Phaedrus of Symposium, nor in the Philebus of Sophist, does he give any clear explanation of his meaning. He would probably have described his method as proceeding by regular steps to a system of universal knowledge, which in fact departs from the whole rather than the whole from the parts. This ideal logic is not practiced by him in the search after justice or in the analysis of the parts of the soul. There, like Aristotle in the Nicomachean Ethics, he argues from experience and the common use of language. But at the end of the sixth book, he conceives another and more perfect method, in which all ideas are only steps or grades or moments of thought, forming a connected whole which is self-supporting and in which consistency is the test of truth. He does not explain to us in detail the nature of the process. Like many other thinkers, both in ancient and modern times, his mind seems to be filled with a vacant form which he is unable to release. He supposes the sciences to have a natural order and condition in age when they can hardly be said to exist. He is sustaining on to the end of the intellectual world without even making a beginning of them. In modern times, we hardly need to be reminded that the process of acquiring knowledge is confused with the contemplation of absolute knowledge. In all science, a priori and a posteriori truths mingle in various proportions. The a priori part is that which is derived from the most universal experience of men, or is universally accepted by them. Then a posteriori is that which grows up around the more general principles and becomes imperceptibly one with them. But Plato erroneously imagines that the synthesis is variable from the analysis and that the method of science can anticipate science. In entertaining such a vision of a priori knowledge, he is sufficiently justified, or at least his meaning may be sufficiently explained by the similar attempts of Descartes, Kant, Hegel, and even of Bacon himself in modern philosophy, anticipations or definitions or prophetic glimpses of truths where the concerning men of nature seem to stand in the same relation to ancient philosophy, which hypotheses bear to modern inductive science. These cases of truth were not made at random. They arose from the supervision and presence of uniformities and first principles in nature, which the genius of the Greek, contemplating the expanse of heaven and earth, seemed to recognize in the distance. Nor can we deny that in ancient times knowledge must have stood still, and the human mind, being deprived of the very instruments of thought, if philosophy had been strictly confined to the result of experience. 2. Plato supposes that when the tablet has been made blank, the artist will fill in the lineaments of the ideal state. Is this a pattern laid up in heaven, or mere vacancy on which he is supposed to gaze with wondering eye? The answer is that such ideas are framed partly by the omission of particulars, partly by imagination perfecting the form which experience supplies Vedo. Vedo represents these ideals in the figure as belonging to, to another world, and in modern times the idea will sometimes seem to proceed, at other times to cooperate with the hand of the artist, as in science, so also in creative art. There is a synthetical as well as an analytic method. One man will have the whole in his mind before he begins to handle the processes of mind, and hand will be simultaneous. There is no difficulty in seeing that Plato's divisions of knowledge are based first on the fundamental antithesis of sensible and intellectual, which reflects the whole pre-Socratic philosophy, in which implied also the opposition of the permanent and transient, of the universal and particular. But the age of philosophy in which he lived seemed to require a further distinction. Numbers and figures were beginning to separate from ideas. The world could no longer regard justice as a cube, and was beginning to see, though imperfectly, that the abstractions of sense were distinct from the abstractions of mind, between the eleatic being of essence and the shadows of phenomena. The Pythagorean principle of number found a place and was, and as Aristotle remarks, a conducting medium from one to the other. Hence Plato is led to introduce a third term which had not hitherto entered into the scheme of his philosophy. He had observed the use of mathematics in education. They were the best preparation from higher studies. The subjective relation between them further suggested an objective one, although the passage from one to the other is really imaginary metaphor. For metaphysical and moral philosophy has no connection with mathematics. Number and figure are the abstractions of time and space, not the expressions of purely intellectual conceptions. When defested a metaphor, a straight line of a square has no more to do with right and justice than a crooked line with vice. The figurative association was mistaken for a real one, and thus the three later divisions of the Platonic proportion were constructed. There is more difficulty in comprehending how he arrived at the first term of the series, which is nowhere else mentioned and has no reference to any other part of his system. Nor indeed does the relation of shadows to objects correspond to the relation of the number to ideas. Probably Plato has been led the love of analogy team use to make 4 terms instead of 3, although the objects perceived in both divisions of the lower sphere are equally objects of sense. He is also preparing the way, as his manner is, for the shadows of images at the beginning of the 7th book, and the imitation of an imitation in the 10th. The line may be regarded as reaching from unity to infinity, and is divided into 2 unequal parts, and subdivided into 2 more. Each lower sphere is the multiplication of the preceding. of the four faculties, faith in the lower division has an intermediate position. CP for the use of the word faith of belief, Greek timius, contrasting equally with the vagueness of the perception of pseudos Greek and the higher certainty of understanding Greek and reason Greek. The difference between understanding and mind or reason Greek is analogous to the difference between acquiring knowledge in the past and the contemplation of the whole. True knowledge is a whole and its address. Consistency and universality are the tests of truth. This self-evidencing knowledge of the whole, the faculty of mind is supposed to correspond. But there is a knowledge of the understanding which is incomplete in emotional ways, because unable to rest in the subordinate ideas. Those ideas are called both images and hypotheses. Images because they are clothed in sense. Hypotheses because they are assumptions only until they are brought into connection with the idea of good, the general meaning of the passage. Novel, then, is the bond which links together sight, and of this kind I spoke as the intelligible, so far as the thought contained in it admits of being translated into the terms of modern philosophy, may be described or explained as follows. There is a truth, one and self-existent, one and self-existent, to which by the help of a ladder let down from above, the human intelligence may ascend. This unity, like the sun in the heavens, the light by which all things are seen, the being by which they are created and sustained. It is the idea of good, and the steps of the ladder leading up to the highest or universal existence are the mathematical sciences, which also contain in themselves an element of the universal. These two we see in a new manner when we connect them with the idea of good. They then cease to be hypotheses or pictures and become essential parts of a higher truth which is at once their first principle and their final cause. We cannot give any more precise meaning to this remarkable passage, but we may trace in it several rudiments of stages of thought which are common to us and to Plato, such as 1. The unity and correlation of the sciences, or rather of science, for in Plato's time they were not yet parted of or distinguished. The existence of a divine power or life or idea or cause of his origin, not yet conceived or no longer conceived as in the Timaeus and elsewhere, under the form of a person. 3. The recognition of the hypothetical and conditioned character of the mathematical sciences and in a measure of every science, when isolated from the rest. 4. The conviction of a truth which is invisible, and of a law, though hardly law another, which permits the intellectual rather than the visible world. The method of Socrates is hesitating and tentative, awaiting for the fuller explanation of the idea of good and of the nature of dialectic in the seventh book. The imperfect intelligence of Glaucon and the reluctance of Socrates to make a beginning mark the difficulty of the subject. The allusion of the Aristotle into the internal oracle or demonic sign of Socrates, which here are always in Plato, is only prohibitory. The remark that the salvation of any remnant of good in the present evil state of the world is due to God only. The reference of the future state of existence, which is unknown to Glaucon in the standbook, and in which the discussions of Socrates and his disciples would resume the surprise in the answers, the fanciful irony of Socrates when he pretends that he can only describe the strange position of the philosopher in a figure of speech. The original observation and the sophists, after all, they are only the representatives and that the leaders of the opinion, the picture of the philosopher standing aside in the shower of state under a wall, the figure of the god base, followed by the expression of goodwill towards the common people, who would not have rejected the philosopher if they had known him. The right noble thought that the highest truths demand the greatest exactness, the hesitation of Socrates in returning once more to his well-worn theme of the idea of God, the ludicrousness of Glaucon, the comparison of philosophy to a deserted maiden who marries Vened here are some of the most interesting characteristics of the sixth book. Yet a few more words may be added on the old theme, which was so oft discussed in the Socratic cycle, of which we, the Glaucon and Anaximander, would fain, if possible, have a clear notion. Like them, we are dissatisfied when we are told that the idea of good can only be revealed to a student of the mathematical sciences, and we are inclined to think that neither we nor they could have been led along that path to any satisfactory goal. For we have learned that differences of quantity cannot pass into differences of quality, and that the mathematical sciences can never rise above themselves into the sphere of our higher thoughts, although they may sometimes furnish symbols or expressions of them and may train the mind in habits of abstraction and self-concentration. The illusion which was natural to an ancient philosopher has ceased to be an illusion to us. But if the process by which we are supposed to arrive at the idea of good will be really imaginary, may not the idea itself be also mere abstraction? We remark first that in all ages, and especially in primitive philosophy, words such as being, essence, unity, good, have exerted an extraordinary influence over the minds of men. The meagerness of negativeness of the contract has been inverse to the power. They have become the forms under which all things were comprehended. There was an there was a need of instinct in the human soul, which they satisfied. They were not ideas, but gods. To this new mythology, the men of later generation began to attach the powers and associations of the elder deities. The idea of good is one of those sacred methods or forms of thought which were beginning to take the place of the old mythology. It meant unity in which all time and all existence were gathered up. It was the truth of all things, and also the light in which they shone forth and become evident to the intelligences of human and divine. It was the cause of all things, the power by which they were brought into being. It was the universal reason, the facet of a human personality. It was the life as well as the light and of the world. All knowledge and all power were comprehended in it. The way to it was through the mathematical sciences, and these two were dependent on it. To ask whether God was the maker of it, or whether it would be like asking whether God could be conceived apart from goodness, and goodness apart from good. The God of Timaeus is not really at variance with the idea of good. They are aspects of the same, differing only as the personal form, as the personal from the impersonal, or the masculine from the neuter, the one being the expression of language of mythology, the order of philosophy. This, this or something like this is the meaning of the idea of good as conceived by Plato. Ideas of number, order, harmony, development may also be said to enter to it. The paraphrase, the paraphrase, which has just been given of it, goes beyond the actual words of Plato. We have perhaps arrived at a stage of philosophy which enables us to understand what he is aiming at better than he did himself. We are beginning to release what he so darkly and at a distance. If he could have been told that this, or some conception of the same kind, but higher than this, was the truth at which he was aiming, and the need which he sought to supply, he would gladly have recognized that more was contained in his own thoughts than he himself knew, as his words are few and his manner reticent and tentative, so must the style of his interpreter be. Personal approach is meaning more regularly by attempting to define it further. In translating him into the language of modern thought, we might insensibly lost to the spirit of ancient philosophy. It is remarkable that although Plato speaks of idea of good as the first principle of truth and being, it is nowhere mentioned in his writings except in this passage. Nor did he retain any hold upon the minds of his disciples in a later generation. It was probably unintelligible to them. Nor does the mention of it in Aristotle appear to have any reference to this or any other passage in his extant writings. And now I will describe in the future the enlightenment of another. Imagine human beings living in an underground then which is open towards the light. They have been there for childhood, having their legs and legs chained, and can only see into the den. At a distance there is a fire, and within the fire and prisoners a raceway and low wall is built along the way, like the screen over which marionette players saw their poor puppets. Behind the wall appear moving figures who hold in their hands various works of art, and among them images of men and animals, wood and stone, and some of the passers-by are taking an others silent. A strange parable, she said, and strange captives. They are ourselves, I replied, and they see only the shadows of the images which the fire throws on the wall of the den. To this they give names, and if we add an echo which returns from the wall, the voice of the passengers will seem to proceed from the shadows. Suppose now that you suddenly turn them round and make them look with pain and grief to themselves as the real images, will they believe them to be real? Will not their eyes be dazzled, and will they not try to get away from the light to something which they are able to behold without blinking? And suppose, brother, that they are dark up as deep and dark ascent into the presence of the sun himself. Will not their sight be darkened, and with the excess of light? Some time will pass before they get the habit of perceiving at all, and at first they will be able to perceive only shadows and reflections in the water. Then they will recognize the moon and the stars, and will at length behold the sun is his shadow, proper place as he is. Last of all, they will conclude, this is how he gives us the year and the seasons, and is the author of all that we see. How we do rejoice in passing from darkness to light. How worthless to them will seem the honors and glories of the den. But now imagine further that they descend into their old habitants. In that underground dwelling they will not see as well as their fellows, and will not be able to compete with them in the measurement of the shadows on the wall. There will be many jokes about the man who went on a visit to the sun and lost his eyes, and if they find anybody trying to set free and direct in one of their number, they will put him to death if they can catch him. Now the cave of Den is the word of sight, and the fire is the sun. The way upwards is the way to knowledge, and in the world of knowledge the idea of good is last seen and with difficulty, but when sin is inferred to be the author of good and right, parent of the world, of the Lord of light in this world, and of truth and understanding in the other, he attains to the beatific vision is always going upwards. He is unwilling to descend into political assemblies of courts and of law, for his eyes are apt to blink at the image of shadows of images which they behold in them. He cannot enter the ideas of those who have never in the least understood the relation of the shadow to the substance, but blindness as of two kinds, and may be caused either by passing out of darkness into light or out of light into darkness, and a man of sense will distinguish between them and will not laugh squarely at both of them. But the blindness which arises from the fullness of light he will deem blessed and pity the other, or if he love at the puzzled soul looking at the sun, he will have more reason to laugh than the inhabitants of the den at those who descend from above. There is a further reason taught by this parable of arrows. Some persons fancy that instruction is like giving eyes to the blind, but we say that the faculty of sight was always there, and that the soul only requires to be round turned round towards the light. And thus, and this is conviction, other features are almost like bodily habits and may be acquired in the same manner, but intelligence has a diviner life and is indestructible, turning either to good or evil according to the direction given. Did you never observe how the mind of a clever roach peers of his eyes, and the more clearly he sees, the more evil he does? Now if you take such a one and cut away from his those leaden works of pleasure and desire which bind his soul to earth, his intelligence will return round his intelligence will turn round, and he will behold the truth as clearly as he knows, discerns his manner ends. And have we not decided that our rulers must neither be so undereducated as to have no fixed rule of life, nor so overeducated as to be unwilling to leave the paradise for the business of the world? We must choose out, therefore, the natures who are most likely to ascend to the light in knowledge of the good. But we must not allow them to remain in the region of light. They must be forced down again among the captives in the den to partake of their labors and honors. Will they not think this a hardship? You should remember that our purpose in framing the state was not that our citizens should do what they like, but that they should serve the state of the common for the common good of all. May we not fairly say to our philosopher friend, we do know friends, we do you no wrong, for in other states philosophy grows wild, and a wild plant owes nothing to grandmother, but you have been trained by us to be the rulers and kings of our hive, and therefore we must insist on our descending into the den. You must each of you take your turn and become able to use your eyes in the dark, and with a little practice you will see far better than those who quarrel about the shadows, whose knowledge is a dream only, whilst yours is a waking reality. It may be that the shade of philosopher who is best fitted may also be the least inclined to the rule, but necessity is laid upon him, and he must no longer live in the heaven of the ideas, and this will be the salvation of the state. For those who rule must not be those who are desirous to rule, and if you can offer to our citizens a better life that of rulers generally is, there will be a chance that the rich, not only in the world's goods but in virtue and wisdom, may be rule. The only life is which is better than the life of political ambition is that of philosophy, which is also the best preparation for the government of a state. Then Then now comes to the question, how shall we create our rulers? What way is there from darkness to light? The change is effected by philosophy. It is not the turning over an oyster shell, but the conversation of a soul from night to day, from becoming to being. And what training will draw the soul upwards? Our former education had two branches, gymnastic, which was occupied with the body, and music, the sister art, which infused a natural harmony into mind, and literature, but neither of these sciences gave any promise of doing what we want. Nothing remains to us that universal or primary science, of which all the arts and sciences are partakers, I mean number or calculation. Very true, including including the art of war. Yes, certainly. Then there is something ludicrous about Parmenides in the tragedy, coming in and saying that he had invented number and had counted the ranks and set them in order. For if Agamemnon could not count his feet, and without number could he must have been a pretty sort of general indeed. No man should be a soldier who cannot count, and indeed he is hardly to be called a man. But I am not speaking of this practical like application of arithmetic, for number, in my view, is rather to be regarded as a conductor to thought and being. I will explain what I meant by the last expression. Things sensible are of two kinds. The one class invite or stimulate the mind, while in the other mind acquisitions. Now the stimulating class are the things which suggest contrast and relation. For example, suppose that I hold up to the eyes three fingers, a forefinger, a middle finger, a little finger. The sight equally recognizes of all three fingers, but without number cannot further distinguish them. Or again, suppose two objects to be relatively great and small. These ideas of greatness and smallness are supplied not by the sense but by the mind, and the perception of their contrast or relation quickens and set emotion and the mind in motion in the mind, which is puzzled by the confused intimations of sense and has recourse to number in order to find out whether the things indicated are one or more than one. Number replies that there are two and not one, and are to be distinguished from another. Again, the sight beholds great and small, but only in a confused chaos, and not until they are distinguished does the question arise of the respective natures. We are thus led on the distinction between the visible and intelligible. That was I meant when I spoke of stimulants to the intellect. I was thinking of the contradictions which arise in perception. The idea of unity, for example, like that of a finger, does not arouse thought unless involving some conception of polarity, but when the one is also the opposite of one. The contradiction gives rise to reflection. An example of this is afforded by any object of sight. All numbers, all number has also an elevating effect. It raises the mind out of the form and flux of generation to be the contemplation of being, having lesser military and retail uses also. The retail use is not required by us, but as our guardian is to be a soldier as well as a philosopher, the military one may retain, and to order higher, and to our higher purpose, no science can better adapt it, but it must be pursued in the spirit of a philosopher, not a shopkeeper. It is concerned not with the visible objects, but with abstract truth, for numbers are pure abstractions. The true arithmetician indignantly denies that each unit is capable of division. When you divide, he insists that you are only multiplying. His one is not material or resolvable into fractions, but an unvarying and absolute equality, and this proves the full intellectual character of his study. Note also the great power which arithmetic has of sharpening the wits. No other discipline is equally severe or an equal test of general ability or equally improving to a stupid person. Let our second branch of education be geometry. I can easily see, replied Glaucon, that the skill of the general will be doubled by his knowledge of geometry. That is a small matter. The use of geometry, to which I refer, is the assistance given by it and in the contemplation of the idea of good and the compelling of the mind to look at true being and not at generation only. Yet the reason of pursuing these studies, as anyone who is less of mathematician is aware, is mean and ridiculous. They are made to look downwards to the arts and not upwards to the eternal existence. The geometer is always taking of squaring, subtending, opposing, as he had as if he had in view action. Whereas knowledge is the real object of the study, it should elevate the soul and create the mind of philosophy. It should raise up what has fallen down, not to speak of lesser uses in war and military tactics and the improvement of the faculties. Shall we propose as a third branch of our education astronomy? Very good, replied Glaucon. The knowledge of the heavens is necessary at once of husbandry, navigation, military tactics. I like your way of giving useful reasons for everything in order to make friends of the world. And there is a difficulty in proving to mankind that education is not only useful information, but a purification of the eye of the soul, which is better than the bodily eye, for by this alone is truth seen. Now, will you appeal to mankind in general or to be the philosopher, or will you prefer to look to yourself only, every man in his own best friend? Then take a step backward, for we are out of order and inside the third dimension of which is of solids after the second which is of planes, and then you may proceed to solid in motion, but solid geometry is not popular and has not the patronage of the state, nor is the use of it fully recognized. The difficulty is great, and the votaries of the study are conceited and impatient. Still, the charm of the pursuit weighs upon men, and if governor would lend a little assistance, there might be great progress made. Very to replied Glaucon, but do I understand you to begin with plane geometry and to place next geometry of solids, and thirdly astronomy, of the motion of solids? Yes, I said, my hastiness has only hindered us. Very good. And now, let us proceed to astronomy, about which I am willing to speak in your lofty strain. No one can fail to see that the contemplation of the heavens draws the soul upwards. I am an exception, then. Astronomy as studied at present appears to me and draws the soul not upwards but downwards. Stargazing is soaring up at the ceiling no better, and man may lie on his back on land or on water. He may look up or look down, but there is no science in that. The vision of knowledge of which I speak is seen not with the eyes, but with the mind. All the magnificence of the heavens is but the embroidery of a copy which falls far short the divine original and teaches nothing about the absolute harmonies or motions of things. Their beauty is like the beauty of figures drawn by the hand of Daedalus or any other great artist, which may be used for illustration, but no mathematician would seek to obtain from the true conceptions of equality or numerical relations. How ridiculous then to look for this in the map of the heavens, in which the imperfection of matter comes in everywhere as a disturbing element, marring the symmetry of day and night, of months and years, of the sun and stars in the courses. Only by problems can we place astronomy on a truly scientific basis. that the heavens alone and except the intellect. Still, mathematics admit of other applications, as the Pythagoreans say, and we agree. There's a sister There's a sister science of harmonical motion adapted to the ear as astronomy is to the eye, and there may be other applications also. Let us inquire of the Pythagoreans about them, not forgetting that we have an aim higher than theirs, which is the relation of these sciences to the idea of God. The error, which prevents astronomy, also prevents harmonics. The musicians put their ears in the place of their minds. Yes, replied Glaucon, I like to see them laying their ears alongside of their neighbors' face, some saying, that's a new note, other declaring that the two notes are the same. Yes, I said, but you mean the empirics who are always twisting and altering the strings of the lyre and caring about the tempers of the strings. I am referring rather to the Pythagorean harmonists who are almost equally in error, for they investigate only the numbers of the consonances which are heard and ascend no higher, of the true numerical harmony which is unheard and is only to be found in marvelous thing, a thing, I replied, which is only useful if pursued with a view to the good. All these sciences are the prelude of the string, and are profitable if they are regarded in their natural relations to one another. I dare say, Socrates, said Glaucon, but such a study will be an endless business. What study do you mean of the prelude or what? For all these things are only the prelude, and usually to suppose that a more mathematician is also a dialectician. Certainly not. I have hardly ever known a mathematician who could reason. And yet Glaucon is not too reasoning that theme of dialectic, which is the music of the intellectual world, and which was by us compared to the effort of sight, when from beholding the shadows on the wall we arrive at last at the images which gave the shadows. Even so the dialectic faculty withdrawing from sense arrives by the pure intellect at the contemplation of the idea of good, and never rests but the very end of the intellectual world, and the roller got out of the cave into the light, and the blinking of the eyes at the sun, and turning to contemplate the shadows of reality, not the shadows of an image only. This progress and gradual acquisition of new faculty of sight by the help of the mathematical sciences is the elevation of the soul to the contemplation of the highest idea of being. So far I agree with you, but now, leaving the prelude, let us proceed to the hymn. What then is the nature of dialectic, and what are the paths which lead thither? Dear Glaucon, you cannot follow you cannot follow me here. There can be no revelation of the absolute truth to one who has not been disciplined in the previous sciences, but that there is a science of absolute truth which is attained in some way very different from those now practiced, I am confident. For all other arts or sciences are relative to human needs and opinions, and mathematical sciences are but a dream or hypothesis of true being, and never analyze their own principles. Dialectic alone rises to the principle which is above the hypothesis, converting gently leading the eye of the soul out of the barbarous slough of ignorance into the light of the upper world with the help of sciences, which we have been describing sciences as they are often termed, although they require some other name, implying greater clearness than opinion and less clearness than science, and this in our previous sketch was understanding. And so we get four names, two for intellect, and two for opinion, reason or mind, understanding, further perception of shadows, which make a proportion being becoming intellect, opinion and science, belief, understanding, perception of shadows. Dialectic may be further described as that science which defines and explains the essence of being of each other, which distinguishes and obstructs the good, and is ready to do battle against all opponents in the cause of good. To him who is not a dialect to him who is not a dialectician, life is but a sleepy dream, and many a man is in his grave before his is well wake up. And would you have the further rules of your ideal state intelligent beings, or stupid as suppose? Certainly not the latter. Then you must train them in dialectic, which will teach them to ask and answer questions, and is the coping stone of the sciences. I dare say that you have not forgotten how our rulers were chosen, and the process of selection may be carried a step further, as before they must be constant and valiant, good looking and of noble manners, but now they must also have natural ability, which education will improve. This is to say, they must be quick at learning, capable of mental toil, retentive, solid, diligent natures, who combine intellectual with moral virtues, not lame and one-sided, diligent in body exercise and indolent in mind, or conversely, not a main soul, which hates falsehood, and yet unintentionally is always wallowing in the mire of ignorance, nor bastard or feeble person, but sound in wind and limb, and in perfect condition for the great gymnastic trial of the mind. Justice herself can find no fault with natures such as this, and they will be the saviors of our state. Disciplines of another sort will only make philosophy more ridiculous than she is at present. Forgive my enthusiasm. I am becoming excited, but when I see her trampled underfoot, I am angry at the authors of her disgrace. I did not notice that you were more excited than you ought to have been, but I felt that I was. Now, do not let us forget another point in the selection of our disciples, that they must be young and not old, for Solon is mistaken in saying that an old man can be always learning. Youth is the time of study, and here we must remember that the mind is free and dainty, and unlike the body, must not be made to walk against the grain. Learning should be at first a sort of play, in which the natural bent is detected. As in training them for war, the young dogs should at first only test blood, but when the necessary gymnastics are over, which during 2 or 3 years divide life between sleep and bodily exercise, then the education of the soul will become a more serious matter. At 20 years of age, a selection must be made of the more promising disciples, with whom a new epoch of education will begin. The sciences which they have hitherto learned in fragments will now be brought into relation with each other and with true being, for the power of combining them is the test of speculative and dialectical ability, and afterwards at 30 a further selection shall be made of those who are able to withdraw from the world of sense into the abstraction of ideas. But at this point, judging from present experience, there is a danger that dialectic may be the source of many errors. The danger may be illustrated by a parallel case. Imagine a person who has been brought up in wealth and luxury amid a crowd of flatterers, and who is suddenly informed that he is a supposition son. He has hitherto honored his reputed parents and disregarded their flatterers, and now he does the reverse. This is just what happens with a man's principles. There are certain doctrines which he learned at home, and which exercise a parental authority over him. Presently he finds that imputations are cast upon them. A troublesome query comes and asks, what is the just and good, or proves that virtue is vice and vice virtue, and his mind becomes unsettled, and he ceases to love, honor, and obey them as he has hitherto done. He is seduced into the life of pleasure, and become a lawless person and rogue. The case of such speculators is very pitiable, and in order that our 30 years old pupils may not require this pity, Let us take every possible care that young persons do not study philosophy too early. For a young man is sort of puppy who only plays with an argument and is reasoned into and out of his opinions every day. He soon begins to believe nothing and brings himself and philosophy into discredit. A man of 30 does not run on in this way. He will argue. He will argue and not merely contradict and adds new honor to philosophy by the sobriety of his conduct. What time shall we allow for this second gymnastic training of the soul? Say, twice the time required for the gymnastics of the body, 6 or perhaps 5 years, to commence at 30, and then for 15 years. Let the student go down into the den and command armies and gain experience of life. At 50, let him return to the end of all things and have his eyes lifted to the idea of God and order his life after the pattern, if necessary, taking his turn at the helm of state and training up others to be his successors. When his time comes, he shall depart in peace to the islands of the blessed. He shall be honored with sacrifices and receive such worship as the Pythian oracle approves. You are a statuary, Socrates, and have made a perfect image of our governors. Yes, and our governesses. For the woman will share in all things with the man, and you will admit that our state is not a mere aspiration, but may really come into being when there shall arise philosopher kings, one or more, who will despise earthly vanities and will be the servants of justice only. And how will they begin their work? The first act will be to send away into the country all those who are more than 10 years of age, and to proceed with those who are left. And the commencement of the sixth book, Plato anticipated his explanation of the relation of the philosopher to the world in an allegory, in this as in other passages, following the order which he prescribes in education and proceeding from the concrete to the abstract. And the commencement of Book 7, under the figure of a cave having an opening towards a fire and a way upwards to the true light, he returns to view the divisions of knowledge, exhibiting familiarly, as in the picture, the result, which had been hardly won by a great effort of thought in the previous discussion, at the same time casting a glance onward at the dialectical process, which is represented by the way leading from darkness to light. The shadows, the images, the reflection of the sun and stars in the water, and stars and sun themselves severally correspond. The first to the realm of fancy and poetry, the second to the world of sense, the third to the abstractions of universal sense, of which the mathematical sciences furnish the type, the fourth and last to the same abstractions, when seen in the unity of the idea, from which they derive a new meaning and power. The true dialectical process begins with the contemplation of the real stars, and not mere reflections of them, and ends with the recognition of the sun or area of God as the parent, not only of light but of warmth and God. To the divisions of knowledge, the stages of education partly answer. First, there is early education of childhood and youth in the fancies of the poets and in the laws and customs of the state. Then there is a training of the body to be a warrior athlete and a good servant of the mind. And thirdly, after an interval follows the education of later life, which begins with mathematics and proceeds to philosophy in general. There seem to be two there seem to be two great aims in the philosophy of Plato. First, to realize abstractions. Secondly, to connect them. According to him, the true education is that which draws man from becoming to being, and to comprehensive survey of all being. He desires to develop in the human mind the faculty of seeing the universal in all things, until the last particulars of chance drop away and the universal also remains. He then seeks to combine the universals, which he has disengaged disengaged from sense, not perceiving not perceiving that the correlation of them has no other basis but the common use of language. He never understands the abstractions, as Hegel says, as mere abstractions of use was employed in the arrangement of facts, but adding nothing to the sum of knowledge when pursued apart from them, or with reference to an imaginary idea of God. Still, the exercise of the faculty of abstraction apart from the facts has enlarged the mind and played a great part in the education of the human race. Plato appreciated the value of this faculty and saw that it might be required by the study of number and relation, all things in which there is opposition or proportion or suggestive or reflection. The mere impression of sense evokes no power of thought or of mind, but when sensible objects ask to be compared and distinguished, the philosophy begins. The science of arithmetic for such distinctions that follow in order to the other sciences of plane and solid geometry and of solid motion, one branch of which is astronomy of the harmony of the spheres. To this is apprehended the sister science of the harmony of sounds. Plato seems also to hint at the possibility of other applications of arithmetical or mathematical proportions, such as we employ in chemistry and natural philosophy, such as the Pythagorean and even Aristotle make use of in ethics and politics, e.g., his distinction between the arithmetical and geometrical proportion in the Ethics, Book 5, or between numerical and proportional equality in the Politics. The modern mathematicians will readily sympathize with Plato's delight in the properties of pure mathematics. He will not be discreet to say with him, let alone the heavens, and the study of beauties of number and figure in themselves. He too will apt to depreciate their application to the arts. He will observe that Plato has a conception of geometry in which figures are to be dispensed with, thus in a distant and shadowy way, seeming to anticipate the possibility of working geometrical problems by a more general mode of analysis. He will remark with interest on the backward state of solid geometry, which, alas, was not encouraged by the aid of the state in the age of Plato, and will recognize the grace of Plato's mind in his ability to conceive of one science of solids in motion, including the earth as well as the heavens, not forgetting to notice the intimation to which allusion has been already made, that besides astronomy and harmonics, the science of solids in motion may have other applications. Still more will he be struck with the comprehensiveness of view which led Plato, at a time when these sciences hardly existed, to say that they must be studied in relation to one another and to the idea of good, a common principle of truth and being. But he will also see, and perhaps without surprise, that in the stage of physical and mathematical knowledge, Plato has fallen into the error of supposing that he can construct the heavens a priori by mathematical problems and determine the principles of harmony is irrespective of the adaptation of sounds to the human ear. The illusion was a natural one in that age and country. The simplicity and certainty of astronomy and harmonics seemed to contrast with the variation and complexity of the world of sense. Hence the circumstance that there was some elementary burst of light, some instrument of distant or time of vibrations, on which they must ultimately rest, was overlooked by him. The modern predecessors of Newton fell into errors equally great, and Plato can hardly be said to have been very far strong, or may even claim a sort of prophetic insight to the subject when we consider that the greater of astronomy at the present day consists of abstract dynamics, by the help of which most astronomical discoveries have been made. The metaphysical philosopher. from his point of view, recognizes mathematics as an instrument of education which strengthens the power of attention, develops the sense of order and the faculty of construction, and enables the mind to grasp under simple formulae the quantitative differences of physical phenomena. But while acknowledging their value in education, he sees also that they have no connection with our higher moral and intellectual ideas. In the attempt which Plato makes to connect them, we easily trace the influences of ancient Pythagorean nations. There is no reason to suppose that he is speaking of the ideal numbers, but he is describing numbers which are pure abstractions, to which he assigns a real and separate existence, which, as the teachers of the art, meaning probably the Pythagoreans, would have affirmed, repel all attempts at subdivision, and in which unity and every other number are conceived as absolute. The truth and certainty of numbers, when thus disengaged from phenomena, gave them a kind of sacredness in the eyes of ancient philosophers. Nor is it easy to say, nor is it easy to say how far ideas of order and fixedness may have had a moral of an elevating influence over the mind of men who, in words of the Timaeus, might learn to regulate their erring lives according to them. It is worthy of remark that the old Pythagorean ethical symbols still exist as figures of speech among ourselves, and those who in modern times see the world pervaded by universal law may also see an anticipation of this last word of modern philosophy in the Platonic idea of good, which is the source and measure of all things, and yet only an abstraction valuable. Two passages seem to require more particular explanations. First, at which relates to the analysis of vision. The difficulty in this passage may have explained, like many others, from differences in the modes of conception prevailing among ancient and modern thinkers. To us, the perception of sense are inseparable from the fact of mind, which accompanies them. The consciousness of form, color, distance is indistinguishable from their simple sensation, which is the medium of them. Whereas to Plato, sense is the Heraclian flux of sense, not the vision of objects, in the order in which they ought to represent themselves to experience sight, but as they may be imagined to appear confused and blurred to the half-awakened of either infant. The first action of the mind is aroused by the attempt to set in order this chaos, and the reason is required to frame distinct conceptions under which the confused impressions of sense may be arranged. Here, hence arises the question, what is greater, what is small, and thus begins the distinction of the visible and the intelligible. The second difficulty relates to Plato's conception of harmonies. These classes of harmonies are distinguished by him. First, the Pythagoreans, whom he proposed to consult, as in the previous discussion on music he was to consult Damon. They are knowledge to him as text in the art, but altogether deficient in the knowledge of its higher import and relation to the good. Secondly, the mere empirics, whom Glaucon appears to confuse with him, and whom both he and Socrates ludicrously describe as experimenting by mere auscultation on the intervals of sounds. Both of these fall short in different degrees on the Platonic idea of harmony, which must be studied in a purely abstract way, first by the method of problems, and secondly as a part of universal knowledge in the relation to the idea of good. The allegory has a politic as well as philosophical meaning. The den or cave represents a narrow sphere of polity or law. Compare the description of the philosopher and lawyer in the theatres, and the like of the eternal ideas is supposed to exercise a disturbing influence on the minds of those who return to this lower world. In other words, their principles are too wide for practical application. They are looking far away into the past and future when their business is with the present. The ideal is not easily reduced to the conditions of actual life and may often be at variance with them. And at first, those who, those who returned are unable to compete with the inhabitants of the den in the measurement of the shadows and are derided and persecuted by them. But after a while, they see the things below in factual proportions than those who have never ascended into the upper world. The difference between the politicians turned into a philosopher and the philosopher turned into a politician is symbolized by the two kinds of disordered eyesight, the one which is experienced by the captive who is transferred from darkness to day, the other of the heavenly messenger who voluntarily for the good of his fellow men descends into the den. In what way the brother like is to turn the inhabitants of the lower world, or how the idea of good is to become the guiding principle of politics is left unexplained by Plato, like the nature and deficiency of dialectic, of which Glaucon impatiently demands to be informed. Perhaps he would have said that explanation could not be given except to a disciple of the previous sciences symposium. Many illustrations of this part of the Republic may found in modern politics and in daily life. For among ourselves, too, there have been two sorts of politicians or statements whose eyesight has become disordered into different ways. First, there have been great men who, in the language of Berkeley, have been too much given to general maxims, who, like G.S. Mill or Booker himself, has been theorists of philosophers before they were politicians, or who, having been students of history, have allowed some great historical parallel, such as the English Revolution of 1688, or possibly Athenian democracy or Roman imperialism, to be the medium through which they viewed contemporary events, or perhaps the long projecting shadow of some existing institution may have darkened their vision. The church of the future, the commonwealth of the future, the society of the future have so absorbed their minds that they are unable to see in the true proportions of the politics of today. They have been intoxicated with great ideas such as liberty or equality or the greatest happiness of the great number or the brotherhood of humanity, and they no longer care to consider how these ideas must be limited in practice or harmonize with the conditions of human life. They are full of sight, but the light to them has become only a sort of luminous mist of blindness. Almost everyone has known some enthusiastic half-educated person who sees everything at vast distances and erroneous proportions. With this disorder of eyesight may be contrasted another of those who see not far into the distance, but what is near only, who have been engaged in all their lives in the trade of a profession, who are limited to a set of threads of the arm. Men of this kind have no universal shape, have no universal except their own interest or the interest of the class, no principle but the opinion of persons like themselves, no knowledge of affairs beyond what they pick up in the streets or at the club. Suppose them to be sent into a larger world to undertake some higher calling, from being statesmen to turn generals or politicians, from being schoolmasters to become philosophers, or imagine them on a sudden to receive in an inward light, which reveals to them for the first time in their lives a higher idea of God and the existence of spiritual world. By this sudden conviction or change is not their daily life likely to be upset, and and on the other hand, will not many of their old prejudices and narrowness still adhere to them long after they have begun to take a more comprehensive view of human beings? From familiar examples like this, we may learn what Plato meant by the eyesight which is liable to two kinds of disorders. Nor have we any difficulty in drawing a parallel between the young Athenian in the 5th century before Christ, who became unsettled by new ideas, and the student of a modern university who has been the subject of a similar of clarung. We to observe that when young men begin to criticize customary beliefs or to analyze the constitution of human nature, they are apt to lose hold of solid principle Greek. They are like trees in which have been frequently transplanted. The earth about them is loose and they have no roots reaching far into the soil. They lie upon every flower, following their own wayward wheels, or because the wind blows with them. They catch opinions as diseases are caught when they are in the air, bound hither and thither. They speedily fall into beliefs opposite of those in which they were brought up. They hardly retain the distinction of right and wrong, and they seem to think one thing as good as another. They suppose themselves to be searching after truth when they are playing the game of follow my leader. They fall in love at first sight with paradoxes respecting morality, some fancy about art, some novelty or eccentricity in religion, and like lovers they are so absorbed for a time in their new notion that they can think of nothing else. The resolution of some philosophical or theological questions seems to them more interesting and important than any substantial knowledge of literature or science, or even than a good life. Like the youth in the syllabus, they are ready to discuss to anyone about a new philosophy. They are generally the disciples of such eminent professors or sophists, whom they rather imitate than understand. They may be counted happy if in later years they retain some of the simple truths which they acquired in early education, and which they may perhaps find to be worth all the rest. Such is the picture which Plato draws and which we only reproduce partly in his own words of the dangers which beset youth in times of transition when old opinions are fading away and the new are not yet firmly established. The condition is ingeniously compared by him to that of a superstitious son who has made the discovery that these reputed parents are not his real ones, and in consequence they have lost their authority over him. The distinction between the mathematician and the dialectician is also noticeable. Plato is very well aware that the faculty of the mathematician is quite distinct from the higher philosophical sense which recognizes and combines first principles. The contempt which he expresses for distinctions of words, the danger of involuntary falsehood, the apology which Socrates makes for his eagerness of speech, are highly characteristic of the Platonic style and mode of thought. The quaint notion of that if Parmenides was the inventor of number, Agamemnon could not have counted his feet, the art by which we are made to believe that this state of ours is not a dream only, the rapidity with which the first step is taken in the actual creation of the state, namely the sending out of the city all who had arrived at 10 years of age, in order to expedite the business of education by a generation, are also truly Platonic. For the last, compare the passage at the end of the third book, in which he speaks that lie about the earthborn man to be believed in the second generation. Book 8. And so we have arrived at the conclusion that in the perfect states wives and children are to be in common, and the education and pursuits of men and women, both in war and peace, are to be common, and kings are to be philosophers and warriors, and the soldiers of the state are to be live together, having all things in common, and they are to be warrior athletes, receiving no pay, but only the fruit from the other citizens. Now let us return to the point at which we discussed. That is that is easily done, he replied. You were speaking of the state which you had constructed, and of the individual answered to his, what of whom you affirm to be good, and you said that the inferior states there were four forms and four individuals corresponding to them, which although deficient in various degrees, were all were all of them worth inspecting with a view to determining the relative happiness or misery of the best or worst men. Then Polemarchus and Adeimantus interrupted you, and this led to another argument, and so here we are. Suppose that we put ourselves again in the same position, and you repeat your question. I should like to know of what constitutions you were speaking. Besides the perfect state, there are only four of any note in Hellas. First, the famous Lacedaemonian or Cretan commonwealth. Secondly, oligarchy, a state full of evils. Thirdly, democracy, which follows next in order. Fourthly, tyranny, which is the disease of death of all government. Now, states are not made of oak and rock, but of flesh and blood, and therefore are, and therefore as this and therefore as there are five states, there must be five human natures in individuals, which corresponding to them. At first, there is the ambitious nature, which answers to the Lacedaemonian state. Secondly, the oligarchical nature. Thirdly, the democratical, and fourthly, the tyrannical. This last will have to be compared with the perfectly just, which is the fifth, that we may know which is the happier, and then we shall be able to determine whether the argument of Thrasymachus or our own is the more convincing. And as before, we began with the state and went to the individual, and so now beginning with democracy, let us go on to the democratical man, and then proceed to the other forms of government, and then individuals who answer to them. But how did democracy arise out of the perfect state? Plainly, like all changes of government, from division in the rulers. But whence came division, seeing heavenly Moses, as Homer says, let them condescend to answer to us, and if, as we were children to whom they put on a solemn face in jest. And what will they say? They will say that human things are fated to decay, and even the perfect state will not escape from this law of destiny. When the wheel comes full cycle in a period sort of long, the plants or animals have times of fertility and sterility, which the intelligence of rulers become alloyed by sense will not enable to them to ascertain, and children will be born out of season. For whereas divine creations are in perfect cycle or number, the human creation is a number which declines from perfection and has four terms and three intervals of numbers, increasing, waning, assimilating, dissimulating, and yet perfectly commonwealth, and, and yet perfectly commensurate with each other. The base of the number which fourth added, of which 4 multiplied by 5 and cubed give to harmonies. The first a square number which is 100 times the base, or 100 times, or 100. The second an oblong, because 100 squares of the rational diameter of a figure, the side of which is 5, subtracting 1 from which are each square, or 2 perfect squares from all, and adding 100 cubes of 3. This entire number is geometrical and contains the rule of the law of generation. When this law is neglected, marriages will be unpropitious Then their offspring, who are then born, will in time become the rulers. The state will decline, and education fall into decay. Gymnastics will be prepared to the music, and the gold and silver and brass and iron will form a chaotic mass. Thus division will arise. Charges the muses answer to our question, and the two answer of course. But what more have to they? But what more have they to say? They say that the two races, the iron and brass, and the silver and gold, will draw the state different ways. The one will take to trade and money making, and the contest, and the others, having the two riches and not caring for money, will resist him. Will resist them. The contest will end in a compromise. They will agree to have private property and will enslave their fellow citizens, who were once their friends and nurturers, but they will retain their warlike character, and will be safely occupied in fighting and exercising rule. Thus arises democracy, which is intermediate between aristocracy and oligarchy.